Hello, everyone. I'm Margaret or Megan Urban, and I am here to introduce James Todd for another one of our lectures. Um, James, I just realized I've known him for 11 years. I first met him as a very non traditional student when he was shifting from being a bespoke tailor to becoming a graphic designer. And along the way, he found typeface design and discovered he had a real skill for it. Also, the ability to work really hard at it. James has made a number of typefaces for under his both his own foundry, JTD Designs, and has made custom typefaces for companies such as Facebook, Nike, Vans, Vassar College, University of Nebraska, Hamilton Type Foundry, Stupidos Type Foundry, P22 Type Foundry. You get the picture. Many of his typefaces have been chosen as bests of the year. I am a big fan of them and use them quite frequently. And so I guess I'll just leave it at that and hand it over to James.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I don't give a lot of talks, so it's exciting when I have the opportunity. So I'd like to thank you for joining here. I'm going to share my screen and we'll go ahead and get started. All right. So this is going to be sort of an overview of the way I work, why I work the way I work, how a project comes together, and how I've managed to do this for 10 years now without completely hating it. So the first thing I want to do is be able to scroll to the next slide, which, there we go. Okay. First thing I want to do is give a little overview of some terms that I'll be using, because I don't know everyone's background with typography and fonts and typefaces and all that. So a font, which you've probably heard of, is one weight of a typeface. So like Times New Roman Italic, which I have here on the screen, is a font compared to a typeface, which is a collection of similar fonts. So Times New Roman Regular, Times New Roman Italic, Times New Roman Bold, and Times New Roman Bold Italic. That grouping is a typeface. It's a collection of fonts. So I don't want anyone to feel like they're left behind if I'm talking and they don't know what I'm talking about, because we have some kind of esoteric language in this field. So yeah, I've been doing this. I've been running JTD Type Foundry for 10 years now. In that time, I've released 9 typefaces that anyone can go and purchase on the website. This doesn't include custom work like Megan had spoken about with Nike or Vans or any of that kind of stuff. I've created 109 fonts within those 9 typefaces. If I were to include all the custom work and everything else, I could probably triple that number maybe. And each typeface project that I work on takes about 2 years of development from start to finish. So it's a long process, and it's a very intensive deep dive of a project. So the way I'm going to break this down is I'm going to kind of break down the projects into 2 different types of projects. The first ones are object influenced typefaces, and those are typefaces that I design that are based on a historical object. So for example, if you look at this on the left here, is the typeface I designed, and on the right is a typeface from 1813 from France, that I wanted to take that historical document and make a contemporary version of that typeface. So that's what you have on the left. And the reason I call it object influenced is because it's influenced by a historical object. And then the other one is subject influenced. And those are typefaces that I designed where I have a specific niche that I'm looking to fill. So for example, the typeface you're looking at here, which is called array, is it was designed as a typeface for coding. So it's a monospace typeface, and the punctuation's really big, and it's meant to be really legible when you're doing programming or coding. But the typeface I'm going to talk about today is my most recent release, and it's called Transducer. And first, I'm going to go through kind of the basics of that project. And these basics apply to every typeface that I design. Like, these are just sort of the foundational things that have to happen in order to create a typeface. The first is it has to be drawn. There has to be something that's produced here. So here's a screen cap of my traditional working situation, and you have here in the center-ish area, you see this big letter A. So everything is completely drawn from scratch. It's kind of like a fancy version of Adobe Illustrator that I use. And what we have to do is we have to determine how tall all the letters are going to be, how wide they're going to be, what they're going to look like, serifs, no serifs. And then you have these spaces, these little gray spaces on the side, and the white space. So how much white space is around the characters. You have the panel all the way on the right here. That's the specific information for each character or letter or in the typeface. So, your side bearings, which are the space between the letter itself and what will eventually be the next letter, which is on the left here. You have an example of how these letters that are drawn would look in a word. So it's all sort of like, this is what I look at every day, and I draw my typeface and I space all the letters here to kind of make a nice rhythm of black and white throughout the whole process. Getting to that, you have spacing of the typeface. So because it's a typeface and we don't control when we make it how it's going to be used at the end of the day when someone downloads it or purchases it, we have to make sure that all the letters work with every other possible combination of every other letter. So going back to this previous slide, when we have this white space here, we have to choose this space so that it creates a pleasing rhythm with any other possible combination of letter forms. So if you look at this graphic here, you can see on the top, you have the word junior. And then in the middle one here, you see this gray, this repeating pattern of gray. And this is the negative space. So when we're drawing the type, we're looking at the negative space created by the gaps between the parts of the letter form. So even on the insides of the letter form. And what we want to do is try to create a rhythm of those spaces. So if you look at the bottom here, all you're seeing is the negative space, but you can still make out what is happening with these letters in the middle of the word. And when we read, we don't just look at the shape of the letter, we look at the shape of the letter and the space between that and the letters before it and after it to kind of read the entire word as one. We don't read just the black parts of a letter. We read the whole thing at once and kind of take a picture of the word space. So that's something we have to really take into consideration when we're making a typeface, is the legibility that is created by this interaction of the black and the white of the letter forms. But of course, when you're doing this, you're always going to run into some letter combinations that don't fit together properly. Like here we have, if you look at the H and the A in the top Havana, you see that they're as close together as they can pretty much be. But because of that, the V and the A has this large gap here. So what we have to do as typeface designers is go through and physically look at every letter combination with every other, and on an individual basis, adjust those combinations. So when I first space out the typeface, like I did in the previous slide where I had the N and the O examples, we'd take that and then we'd look at all the individual other combinations and adjust them manually on a case-by-case basis. So what you'd have is the word as it appears on the bottom here with a pretty even spacing between black and white. So we have to do that for every single letter combination. Again, this is part of why it takes 2 years to do these sort of projects, is because we have to take into account not just the letter combinations that are found in English, but the letter combinations that are found in different languages. The way different languages use different types of punctuation for things have to be taken into account. So it's really just going through in a brute force sort of way, looking at every possible combination and making adjustments. So then I'm going to talk about those are the things that happen to every typeface that I do. Doesn't matter if it's, some crazy looking script calligraphic font or something that's just a sans serif like this. They all have that same process. But this is where things kind of are unique to the project. And that comes into the scale of the typeface. What is it for? So this typeface Transducer, my most recent release, this is more of that subject-oriented approach. So what I did is I looked at things that have interfaces, historical interfaces, physical interfaces, mostly kind of mid-century to 1980s. And I looked at the type that was used for those sort of interfaces. So on the left here, you have a map that a pilot would use. I think this was from the 60s. And on the right, you have the layout for, I believe this was the Gemini spacecraft. And while the typefaces aren't, they don't look similar, it's sort of that use case is what I was looking at. What kind of typefaces are used in situations where something has to be read quickly, but you don't need to read a whole lot of copy? So when you look at a map, you're not reading a long block of text. You're reading one word at a time, or two words, or just a group of numbers, or something like that. Same thing with the gauges on the right here. You're just looking at a little bit of information, but it needs to be clear. And it needs to be, something you can read in a split second to make a decision. So that's sort of what I was, what I wanted to reference when I approached this new typeface project, is things that would be legible. It didn't have to be for long blocks, but just something that would be legible and useful in short bursts of information, but still kind of reference that mid-century technology. Here's again some more examples of the sort of things that I was looking at. Again, a video cassette tape and a microphone or instrument input. So like instrumentation, things like that, where it's just, again, one or two words. And you can see that these aren't using the same typeface, but there's sort of a similarity between all of these typefaces in the way that they're used and the way that they present the information. And that's kind of, again, what I was looking at. So then once you kind of figure that out, you have to figure out the rest of the scope of the projects. So how many weights of the typeface, and for weights, I mean like the bold version is a weight, the regular version is a weight. How many widths? Do I want narrowed letters? Do I want wide letters? Do I want things in between? Do I want all of that? And then language support. Who is this typeface for? Is it going to be used in North America? Is it going to be used in Europe? Is it going to be used in Africa? How much of the world do I want to support with this typeface? And that's where the project can scale rapidly out of control. So that's something you kind of have to nail down. And then extra characters, because this typeface is designed for conveying information and interfaces and things like that. What sort of extra characters do I need to include that would be useful to someone who is designing an interface? So weights and widths. Here's your traditional, like when we looked at the Times New Roman, here's your traditional family of typefaces. You have your regular, your italic, your bold, and your bold italic. Well, with Transducer, what ended up happening was this. We had condensed typefaces at the top. We have wide typefaces at the bottom. We have hairline weights, the really thin ones. We have the black weights that we call them, which are the really bold ones. This typeface family included all of this because I wanted it to cover, again, be able to be used in a wide variety of applications. I had to make sure that it could fit in a wide variety of places. So in places where the regular width was too wide, there's a condensed width. And then there's places where, the regular width is too narrow, so there's an extended width. And again, some of this is also stylistic. Like I think the extended widths look more, they have more of that mid-century technological look to them. So that was, again, part of why I chose the scope that I chose. And then to language support. So my first release, which is a typeface called Jarvis, it supported 422 different languages that are used throughout the world. And that project was quite the undertaking. Each one of those languages, some of them just sort of happened to overlap and it wasn't a big deal, but some of them needed different characters that are only used by that language. And I had to research how to design those characters, and it became a big project. So what I realized is this is not sustainable. If I want to design typefaces for a living, I can't make each type family this large because it just becomes unwieldy. If I have to update something with the typeface, or if there's an issue, it has to be corrected through a wide variety of accented characters and things like that. So the next typeface I did, which was it's called a song, supported 272 languages, which is a more realistic approach because a lot of the languages that Jarvis supported are languages that have very small usage. They have a very small user base. Not to discount the fact that like it's not important or anything like that, because that's completely not true. But as far as the approach that I take with my work and my foundry, that isn't really what we focus on. We don't, and we just that those markets aren't really our markets. I don't really market to linguists or um, those sort of things. So a lot of that was just sort of an experiment in whether I could do it or not. And it's not really something that we focus on as a main part of our business. So 272 languages was a much more realistic number for us. And a lot of those have overlapping characters, so it was easy to do. This typeface, Transducer, supports 292. And that's because I decided that some of the markets that I had ignored in previous typefaces should be included. Things like Vietnamese, which has a series of characters and accents that are or mostly just accents that are unique to Vietnamese, and that results in a lot of type foundries ignoring that language because they don't want to spend the time to add those extra 20 characters. And I decided that that is a place where it would be worthwhile to support a language system that is underserved. So I've decided that everything after Asan would support Vietnamese, and that included Transducer. Eventually, I will go back and add Vietnamese to Asan. That's just something that has not happened yet. So 292 languages is sort of the sweet spot for our work. And then extra characters. So here's where we have, when I was talking about interfaces and how this typeface was designed for interfaces, I had some decision making to do as far as what else would go into the typeface. And I realized that if this is for interfaces and stuff, not only would it need arrows, it would need all the symbols you would traditionally find on the old technology that I was referencing, because that a lot of those symbols are still used today. So I had to find all the specifications of how to design all these things, like the nuclear radiation symbol and the biohazard symbol, and make sure that they were up to their standards for a lot of these kind of symbols as to what they need to look like, how they need to be represented, because they are a universal design and they mean something important. So I had to make sure that all of those work together harmoniously with the rest of the typeface. So that meant the height of all of these symbols had to relate to the height of the characters so that it all worked in a harmonious way. And then I had to figure out how many of these characters I wanted to include, where to draw the line, and then stick to that line that I drew. So I decided I wanted to include a lot of the um, symbols you would find on musical equipment. So we have here your fast forward, your rewind, your skip, your play and pause and your stop and your record and your power button and all those sort of symbols, your positive, your negative. And then I realized also that because this was probably going to be used not in a mid-century sort of situation, but in a contemporary situation, I needed to include symbols that would be useful to contemporary designers. So I have things like the shopping cart icon, the locked, unlocked icon, search icons, headphones icons, your check boxes, your email link, the radio buttons, all the sort of things you would find on a website today. So not only does this typeface, is it designed for historical interfaces or physical interfaces, but it's also designed for digital interfaces. And that kind of bridges the gap between the source material and the contemporary situations in which you would use a typeface. Because I realize not everyone is making rocket ships from the 60s, anymore. So of course I want it to be practical and useful for designers. So I make sure to include those kind of symbols. Yeah. So here are some examples of that typeface transducer in use. So here again is a map, I think this was again from the 60s. And this uses transducer, and all the different styles of transducer are used within this map. So you can see the condensed numbers on the compass readings around here. You can see that the different weights are used to differentiate different types of information, and sort of establish a hierarchy of information when a pilot would glance at this map for, approaching this airfield. So again, this was also, not only do I use these sort of things as promotional tools, but they're a way for me to assess the typeface and make sure that it matches the criteria that I established for it while I'm designing. Because over the course of the 2 years you're working on a project, it's easy to kind of lose focus on what your original goals were and get distracted and find something else that's interesting and saying, oh, maybe I should adapt this project to that or something like that. But I always try and stick with, I establish a baseline for what I want this to be, and then I try and stick with that throughout the course of the project. And making these promotional pieces kind of helps reinforce that and helps make sure that I stick to that intended goal of the project. So again, here is the back of a stereo receiver, because again, this is based on physical interfaces. So here you can see a lot of the symbols in use. So you can see, here you have the grounded symbol, you have the electrical symbols, the warning symbols that are in the typeface, the alternating current symbols, direct current symbols, all that sort of stuff, along with just your regular text, just short bursts of text like the typeface was designed for. Slightly longer text here, but again, still fits in with the intended usage of the typeface. And again, it allows me to check and make sure that the typeface is working as I intended it to be. Again, here's another example of that. This was a analog tape delay effect that would be in like a music studio or something like that. And again, this is allowing me to test the typeface in different situations. This, I was testing the italic version of the typeface, which is really just taking the regular version and slanting it and then adjusting all the shapes to make sure that the strokes, which are the black parts of the typeface, are even in weight. because this typeface, that's the sort of italic you would find in a typeface of this sort of style. So in the end, what we ended up with was the transducer typeface had 15 weights spread over 3 widths. So you had your condensed, your regular, and your extended, for a grand total of 30 fonts, because for each weight you had your regular, upright, and your italic. And it supported 292 languages and had 690 total characters. So, it's pretty standard. 690 characters is a pretty standard collection of characters for one of our typefaces. Maybe a little bit more because we included more symbols, but around that number is pretty standard. So now what I want to go over is how I approach a project like this and how I'm able to do projects like this year after year and not burn out, and just take care of myself, and I'm able to manage these sort of situations and keep this as a viable long-term business. And number one, this one took me a while to learn, is that my health comes first. If I'm not taking care of myself, I can't do the work. And I know it's hard, especially when you're in school, to prioritize your health. And when you're young, it's easy to ignore things, but things have a way of creeping back. So it's important to listen to your body, because if you're not healthy, you can't work and you can't do the things you need to do. And long-term health issues definitely make it hard to work. So number one is listen to your body and take care of your health. Sitting in front of a computer for 12 hours a day is necessary sometimes. But if you do it day after day after day for months, you're going to have some problems down the line. So make sure that you keep your health in mind. Number two is good things take time. And that's okay. I know it's, especially if you're looking at social media and stuff and you see people turning out things and thinking, oh, everyone's so much faster than me, or their work is so much better than mine, or something. You don't see time that's spent on projects when you're only looking at social media posts or things like that. And the good work takes time, and it takes the focus time. It takes, like a deep commitment to the time, not having distractions, at least for me, and really taking the time to think about what it is that I'm trying to do instead of just kind of mindlessly drawing or something like that. But taking the time to really process what I'm working on and how I'm working on it. Number three, this one, again, took me a long time to learn, and that's it's okay to be unproductive. Not every day is going to be your best day. You're not going to have great idea all the time. And it's okay to know when it's time to say, this isn't working, or I'm going to come back to this and going to take a break or something and walk away for a little bit. Or a while if you have the luxury to walk away for a while. But it's okay to be unproductive. Again, that's hard with the way social media and things kind of portray everybody is just working all the time, doing all this amazing stuff all the time. But it's okay to take time off and kind of reevaluate where you are and refocus. Because if you're not focused, your work's not going to be focused, and it's going to show. So it's better to take the time off and have a day where you don't get anything done than to do, 10 hours of poor quality work that you come back to the next day or in a few days and think, oh, this was terrible. I'm going to have to redo this anyway. So definitely take a break if you're starting to kind of if you're not in the process. No, opposite, but find something that is and invest in that as well. So again, because a lot of us work at computers and things like that, it's important to find something that is unrelated to computers, for me at least, to completely unplug and do something else. Whether it doesn't have to be like exercise or something, but just something that's unrelated to your work. And what's interesting is when you do that, you'll find a lot of answers to your work in the things that are unrelated to it. So it's kind of like the shower thoughts, when you're in the shower, you think of ideas and things like that. When you're not actively engaged with what you're working on and you're doing something completely unrelated, that's when ideas start to come to you and things start to come to you. Because if you force it, if you sit there and you try to like force an idea to happen, it's probably not going to happen. Unless, I don't know, maybe you're very lucky, maybe you will have that. But most of the time, it's not going to happen. So it's important to find something else that you can put some energy into. And those two things will kind of have like a symbiotic relationship to each other, your work and something that is completely unrelated. And both will kind of help out the other in terms of making you be able to solve problems. Number 5, this one's tough. I still struggle with this, but it's saying no to things. When you're working on big long-term projects, especially in the case of type design, a lot of this is speculative work. When I make a typeface, I have no idea if it's going to sell well. And, when I start a typeface, it's 2 years until the end date. I don't know what the design field is going to look like in 2 years. I don't know what the trends are going to be. I don't know anything. So it's economically, financially, it's a risk doing typeface design, because we don't know, we can't predict the future. We don't know what's going to be a hit typeface, what's going to be the next Gotham, Helvetica, or whatever, or what's going to never sell anything. So saying no to things that might seem like opportunities is kind of ridiculous, but not every opportunity is a good opportunity. And it's impossible to predict what opportunities that come to you are going to be, like where opportunities are going to come from, I suppose is what I'm trying to say. You never know. I've gotten projects from, just the most random places that I would never think to advertise there or contact people there or anything. They just come at you from just the most bizarre situations. It's impossible to predict the future and predict where your career is going to go exactly, or how, the market is going to shift exactly, or anything like that. You don't know. Everything is a gamble. Everything's a risk. So it's just sort of like, look at each opportunity on its own merits. And if it's something that is important to you, then say yes. Or something, if you need financially, if it is financially and for your health a responsible choice to make, say yes to that project. But there are so many projects where the deadlines are ridiculous, or the demands are too high, or the budget is not worth the time involved, where you're better off, your time is better served working on a long-term project, that it's okay to say no or recommend other people. You don't have to grab every opportunity that comes your way, because not every opportunity is worth grabbing. Sometimes you can tell from the email that a project is going to be more of a headache than it's worth, or whatever the situation might be. And I know when you're in school and when you're young and stuff, it seems like every opportunity is, you have to do it. You have to take it, because financially it's, you don't have a choice. And that's true. But sometimes the financially smart decision is to say no, especially when it comes to work that's free, even if it's for friends or whatever it is, or for anything. um, someone's always paying for the work. Either it's the client or it's you. If the work is free, you're the one who's going to be paying for the work in terms of time or effort or energy or whatever. Um, so it's important to determine if you really want to commit to that, because doing something halfway, committing to something halfway, it's not good for anyone. You're not going to be happy with the result. They're not going to be happy with the result. So saying no is definitely something to not be afraid of. Um, and it's still something that I struggle with because it's so hard to say to turn down, a project, but sometimes it's just not the right fit and it's just not the right time, uh, or you have too many other things going on. But it's more responsible of you to say no to something that you can't give 100% to than it is to say yes and then have it blow up in your face. And some of us learn that lesson the hard way and have things blow up, but um, it's something that you always have to try and find a balance with. And number 6, sharing your knowledge is very important, at least to me. So the thing about type design is when I started doing type design, there weren't many formal places to learn the field. There were really like 2 or 3 places in the world that taught type design formally. Um, and I learned by the people who were older than me taking their time to kind of show me the ropes and help me get going. And that's something that I think is extremely important to help pass on. And it's when I, like Megan said, that before I was a typeface designer, I apprenticed as a bespoke tailor. And in that field, it's interesting because everyone is it's all super old school. Everyone's very closely guarded with their knowledge. It's no one wants to share anything or kind of give away their secrets or anything like that. And it's a tough field to break into. And then when I went into typeface design, it was the complete opposite. Everyone was more than happy to share tips and tricks, and your competition would email you asking you for help, and you'd email them asking you for help. And it's just much more open and a healthy environment. And that's something that um, only helps out everybody. So sharing your knowledge not only helps out the person that you're directly giving the knowledge to, but as more people do it, it helps out the entire field and the entire industry and all the kind of related industries, because the more knowledge people have, the better everything gets. So there's no sense in hoarding your knowledge. It's just kind of cruel. So sharing your knowledge is a big part of the way we do things here. Number 7 is walking away. And with long projects, this is important. The way that I traditionally do it is when I work on a project, like a big typeface project, towards the end of the project, when I have it pretty much wrapped up, I'll put it away for some amount of time, a couple months, something like that. And I won't look at it. I won't think about it. I'll start up a new project or do something else. And then I'll come back to it, because when you're so invested in it, when you've worked on it every day for, 18 months or something, um, you're too invested at that point. You can't see the project for what it is. All you see are the details. You can't see the whole picture. So by walking away and coming back with a fresh set of eyes, and kind of a new philosophy of the project, like you kind of forget the specifics of the project, so you're able to approach it as someone who would be using whatever it is you're making or reading whatever it is you're writing, because they don't have any kind of baseline understanding or knowledge of what it's supposed to be. So that's the closest you can get as the creator of something to your customer or whomever it is that is looking at your work, is by staying away from that project long enough that you can kind of forget about it and forget about the details And then you're able to come back at it and see it in a new light and see the mistakes that you've made. Hopefully, you'll be able to see the mistakes you made and kind of have a new understanding of where to go from there. Because if you finish something and then you send it to your publisher or whatever the next day, or after you've reread it once, in the next week, um, you're not going to notice those things. You're not going to have enough time away from it to kind of have a fresh approach. And I've done that with typefaces where I've released them immediately, and then I've had issues where I've had to go back and have updates and things like that because there are things that I missed or I wasn't completely happy with it or something like that. So walking away, even though it's exciting to be like done, oh, I'm done and I'm going to be done with this project and never have to think about it again or whatever. It's important to have that time scheduled into the project for you to step away from it. And I try to schedule that in even when I'm doing custom work. I'll try to have at least a few days where I can not look at it, like a weekend. I'll say, set a deadline for the deliverables on Monday so that I can spend the last part of the week not looking at it, and then over the weekend I can reassess it, something like that, because it's important to have the fresh eyes and to see it new. And that kind of relates to number 8, which is deciding on your scope and sticking with it. When I was working on Transducer, I talked about how the scope of the project, I was trying to decide how many languages to support, how many symbols to include, all that kind of stuff. But while you're working on a project, you get excited about things and you see other things, especially long projects, because you'll see other people's work and they'll do something like they'll include a whole nother script. They'll support, Cyrillic or something like that. And you'll say, oh, maybe I should do that. That would look cool. Or they'll have, something else for their project that you think, oh, I should throw this in as well. But that's a really easy way to end up burnt out because at least in type design, every time you add something, it's sort of an exponential growth of the project. Because again, since we had, a collection of 30 fonts that we're working on here, you add one character to that typeface and you're doing it 30 times. So every time you decide, oh, I'm going to add a new script and it's only an extra 100 characters, well, that turns into, that makes it a huge project now. And that's where you really need to stick to your scope. You can always do another project or another typeface or something like that, where you can try that out or do something like that, like whatever it is that you saw. But for the project that you're doing, stick to what it is that you decided on in the beginning, or start a new project, because it's so easy to blow things out of the scale that you can handle, and then you never finish, and then you get burnt out, and it just creates such a mess. And the last one is to be a generalist in your life, but in your work, be a specialist. So for example, even though I studied graphic design, I don't design logos, I don't design websites, I don't do UI, UX. I do typefaces and I do lettering, and that's it. Even though, I know how to do those sort of things, I don't take on that kind of work because I just don't have the bandwidth to be able to take on all these different types of projects and commit to them 100% and do them well. So my work is very specialized. And if people come to me asking for websites or something, I send them to other people that I know that do that sort of work and do it well. Because even though I could do it, it's not what I do. And I don't want it to become what I do. I want to stick with what I like and what I'm good at, I guess. I don't know if I'm good at, but what I'm okay enough at to make a living. But then everything else that I do outside of work, I try to be as, rounded as possible and taken as many different things as possible and spread my interests as wide as possible. And that kind of relates to number 4 in finding the opposite of what you do, because you're able to pull from all these different things, and pull from things you didn't expect to sort of help you become better at what it is you do, and just become, um, I don't know, have a more well-rounded worldview and things like that. So it's important to kind of be as specialized as you feel comfortable being with your work, and then in everything else, just sort of take it all in and try and sort of appreciate as much as you can about everything else. That doesn't mean you have to do it. Like, let's say you start getting into, you're a programmer or something, and you start kind of dabbling in logo design. That doesn't mean that you have to do it commercially or professionally or anything like that. That can just be, something you do for fun. It doesn't have to be, not everything has to be a money making venture. It's important to have hobbies that are just hobbies. I know people talk about doing what you love all the time, but when you do what you love, it becomes something that you hate because you end up doing the parts of it that you don't like, and doing it for people that have different tastes than you, and you butt heads with them. So be sure to have your hobbies stay hobbies. Not everything needs to be monetized. And to me, that's extremely important. I have a lot of hobbies that I do just for fun, just to not be at work. And I think it helps make the work better. And I have no interest in making money with those things. And that's okay. So, yeah, that kind of wraps up my approach to the work that I do, and how it all fits together. So I want to thank you all for having me. And on my website, I have trial versions of all my typefaces, which you can try out for free. And the array typeface you can use for free in non-commercial work. So you can, if you're a programmer or something, you can download it and use it, as your programming typeface, whatever you want. And then I do offer student discounts as well for all of our typefaces. And if you have any questions, any of you, just, I assume we're doing a Q&A, but also you can email me or find me online on social media. But otherwise, yeah, I want to thank you all for having me, and I hope some part of that was useful to someone. Is kind of the main goal. So yes, thank you.
Thanks a lot, James. I think it's really interesting to see how you can sustain yourself through such a long-term project. I mean, especially as students, you're used to thinking about things in terms of, a month is a long term, or commercial work where you maybe have a 6-month turnaround for a really big project. But I guess. I guess I'll start. Well, if unless there's any other questions, I'll start with asking. You talked about typefaces that or how you get inspired with your typefaces. I'm curious, where do you go? Like you talked about with Transducer, what was how that came about, but what for a commercial piece or something that is bespoke, what gives you the inspiration? Or
a lot of times if it's a client comes to me with something, they'll kind of have a somewhat of an idea, and then just from I have a collection here of old historical specimens and just a whole bunch of lettering that I find interesting. I try and keep a collection of that around me to pull from for various things. And I'll have a client that say come to me for a script typeface, And, it's not their job to know about every type of style of calligraphy or things like that. So they'll come to me with an idea, and then I'll take that idea and look at the context of it and sort of say, well, this thing exists that was done 300 years ago that, of course, they're not going to be aware of. And I can show it to them and say, something like this could perhaps with what you need, we could blend the two together and create something unique that would be, special in that way. So it's sort of a combination of the two approaches I spoke about, where they have the subject of what needs to happen, and I bring in an object, a historical object of some kind, and say, well, we could use this and combine it with what you need and make something unique that no one had considered. Because again, it's not up to the client to have a deep understanding of historical typefaces.
Tim Fife asks, how many different projects do you work on at one time? How long do clients expect projects to take when they first approach you?
Normally I'll have one or two long-term projects going at any time, depending on where in the process it is. And then last year kind of threw things for a loop, but normally I'll have a custom project, usually one at a time. The custom projects tend not to be as involved because it's usually only one or two weights and the language support is a lot smaller. So, and as far as the turnaround for the custom projects, it's usually a lot quicker. I've had some that have been a month. I had someone email me today asking if I could have a typeface done by Wednesday of this week. So it's just sort of the mindset of a lot of art directors and stuff that, turnaround is rapid fire turnaround sort of thing. So with custom work, things move a lot faster. And sometimes I say, like, I can't meet that deadline. It's not going to happen. And sometimes I'll just charge more if the deadline's really high and I have to put other things on the side. I'll say, this is going to take all of my time, so it's going to cost you more money to make up for that. But normally a couple months for one or two weights because the language support is not as comprehensive, or the usage is very specific to a certain thing. Like we need a typeface for a specific style of signage or something. So I can just design for that and I don't have to worry about how it's going to look on the websites or printed or anything, So because of the specifications are so clear, it's not like with the retail typefaces that I release where I have no idea how it's going to be used. So I have to kind of plan for anything. These are so specific that they can move a lot faster.
So Langston Wells asks, hey James, thank you for your talk. How do you market your fonts when there seems to be such a large supply of fonts and typefaces available to designers, most for free? Has the way you've marketed your fonts changed from the beginning of your foundry, and how?
How do I market them? I don't market them very well. That's the one area that I've not spent a lot of time because I'm more interested in the process. And by the time I finish typeface, it's like, all right, on to the next one. I don't care about this anymore. But I do I'll do social media and Instagram and things like that. But I find that the best way to market things is still kind of one-on-one with people who own studios or freelancers or art directors. So either meeting them in person or emailing with them or something like that is still the best way to get it in front of people. I don't do a lot of competitions or anything like that because it's a lot of effort to prepare for those sort of things. And again, this goes back to the saying no thing. It's how much time do I want to spend on something that has potentially no return. But dealing with people individually one-on-one is still kind of the best way to do this sort of thing, because it's also, a typeface is rarely an impulse purchase. Rarely is someone going to say, oh, I have $400 burning a hole in my pocket, I'm going to go buy 30 fonts with it or whatever. It's usually specific to a situation. So a lot of times the marketing is sort of done by, as long as the typeface is out there and the website's out there, people looking for something to fit a specific niche. So they'll kind of come to me more than I go to them, because you can't really cold sell people on type that easily.
Yeah. Although I was reading one of the descriptions of Alfred,
Mhm.
that somebody said that it was purchased, it wasn't a drunk purchase, but it was a purchase on a whim.
Yeah, it's a lot easier with the display. So Elfrith is the black letter typeface that you saw at the very beginning and the very end of the talk, and it's a lot more kind of a fun typeface. Use it for big headlines and things like that. And something like that is a lot easier for people to kind of do as an impulse, because it's something fun and quick, and you can use it for you know greeting cards or whatever. And it's not as expensive because it's not as big a family. So there is that. Those tend to be more impulse purchases than the big collections of 30 fonts.
Sorry, I'm just checking to make
That's
sure
fine.
I've got the. Okay. I think that that squares away the questions, unless there's any last minute questions there. Um, we do have another one.
All right.
So Langston follows up on the topic of impulse buys. How do you feel about type trends? Do you ever try and design for trends? I know you said this is hard to do on time crunch, or do you try to design each typeface to be timeless?
This is something I've had to talk. I talked recently with a bunch of younger type designers about this. And what I've noticed over the years I've been doing this is that, trends, they come and go, and the people who chase them are always going to be just a little bit behind. So what I try and do is do things that'll kind of always be somewhat relevant, and kind of build up a collection of things that you could use for a long time. That'll still be unique. I'm not making just clones of Helvetica and Times New Roman, but things that will, you can purchase it and you can use it for more than one project, and you can use it for more than a few years, and you'll get your money's worth out of that typeface. And for me, that makes things a little easier for me, because as I build up my collections of typefaces that I'm selling, none of them are really being dropped because they're no longer trendy. So as I build up the catalog of typefaces that are available, they're all still going to be useful in some way. They're not going to have features that are too trendy or, whatever. Um, so that, I feel, also helps the client that I would be, or the designer who would be coming to my website, because they have a bigger catalog to pull from. They're not looking at stuff that, was really cool in 2009, but now would be like, oh, that's makes it everything look dated. So to me, it's important to do things that are somewhat more timeless and practical.
Okay. Thank you. I don't think there are any more questions. So I just want to thank you for joining us
Well, thank you
this
for having me.
evening, James. I know it's, as you mentioned, there's not a lot of places in the world that teach type design, so it's always
That's
really
correct.
interesting to see the inside of how it works, and how these massive projects are sustained.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for joining us,
Yeah,
and have a good evening.
you
Big
too.
nuts.
Thank you all for being here.